This episode, and others like it, are brought to you by the generous support of my patrons on Patreon. If you'd like to help support this channel, join our patrons-only Discord, and get early access to every video, consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/secondthought. In the immortal words of philosopher Tom DeLonge, work sucks, I know. So what if we worked less? You know that feeling when you get to work on Wednesday morning and you're like, man, I've still got half a week to go. It's awful, and people have been experiencing that same feeling for like 100 years now. Though admittedly, back then, most workers were just glad they weren't working 100-hour weeks like their parents had. All the way back in 1926, the Ford Motor Company decided to implement a 5-day, 40-hour work week. This was due to a number of factors, primarily pressure from militant labor, but also the fact that Henry Ford thought that by offering pretty solid employment perks for the time, comparatively good work-life balance, and a wage well above the average, he could grow his customer base, which would increase brand recognition and drive further sales. A little over a decade later, the Fair Labor Standards Act codified a 44-hour workweek in federal law, and that was adjusted to 40 hours per week 2 years later. This meant that if bosses wanted their employees to work longer hours, they'd have to pay overtime. There were, and still are, plenty of exceptions to this rule, but that's a topic for another video. The point is, there haven't been any meaningful changes to the federally recognized workweek since the World War II era. Why is that? Let's look at some historical context. The period leading up to the recognition of the 5-day, 40-hour workweek was incredibly tumultuous. You had the First World War, intense labor and union activity pushing for better conditions, the Great Depression, and then the Second World War. Americans were fed up with being treated like dirt and used as cannon fodder for the benefit of society's upper crust. In addition to these factors, the Industrial Revolution shifted the way we look at work. It drew hundreds of thousands of people into new, developing cities to work in factories, and productivity went through the roof with the implementation of new machinery. The combination of these technological, economic, and social factors made it possible for workers to secure some important victories for labor, including the modern workweek as we know it. If you'd like to learn a bit more about the importance and power of militant labor, check out the recent episode we did on unions. Now, if productivity gains were a major factor in winning the 5-day workweek, why haven't we seen something similar in more recent years? Since 1979, breakthroughs in computing and other modern technologies have allowed a sort of second industrial revolution. Productivity has once again swiftly increased, and has vastly outpaced worker compensation. We're getting more done today in a single afternoon than our grandparents could have done in a week, and we're getting paid less for it when adjusted for inflation and cost of living. We don't need to work as many hours as we do to accomplish our tasks. So why haven't we shortened the workweek accordingly? Well, as with most things starting around the 70s and 80s, we can thank everyone's favorite president, Ronald Reagan. It shouldn't surprise anyone that delinking productivity gains from worker compensation was intentional. Policymakers in the Reagan era, and in the extended Reagan universe since then, have tried their best to decouple economic growth from employee compensation, meaning that as companies reap larger profits, they don't also have to raise employee pay, which in turn means more of that money goes into the pockets of executives and shareholders. This more conservative economic worldview, part of Reagan's famous trickle-down economics, which, mind you, has been thoroughly debunked in recent years, also explains the reason we haven't heard much talk of shortening the workweek. Why give workers more time off when you can just keep squeezing more value out of them? But here's the thing. We have the data to show that a shorter workweek not only improves workers' lives, but positively impacts the company they work for too. Let me explain. It's no secret that humans aren't productive the entire 8 or so hours they're at work. There's just not enough to keep us busy for that long. The exact figures vary by industry, but on average, workers are only engaged in productive, business-related activities for less than 60% of the day. The stats for office workers are particularly striking. Assuming an 8-hour day, the average office worker is only productive for 2 hours and 23 minutes. That's a huge amount of time where there's just nothing to do. There are only so many emails you can respond to after all. Now, we've got a couple options here. The first is for the boss to find a way to force workers to be productive for the entire 8 hours, or at least closer to it. Usually this takes the form of enforcing busy work. For me, when I worked at Best Buy selling cameras, that meant polishing the lens cases anytime I wasn't actively talking to a customer. And let me tell you, those were the cleanest panes of glass in all of Texas. After a certain point, it's just ridiculous to try to keep workers working for the sake of not being unproductive. Obviously, this practice has overwhelmingly negative effects. It's mind-numbing, pointless, and makes you hate your job and your boss just a little bit more. Even from a capitalist perspective, it's pretty clear that enforcing maximum productivity is a net negative. That's where shortening the workweek comes in. There have been a number of 4-day workweek trials in different countries over the last few years. Let's take a look at some of the conclusions from the most recent experiments, which were conducted in the US and Ireland in 2022. The two trials, which began in February and March, consisted of 33 companies and over 900 employees. The premise was simple. Companies that were interested in trying out a reduced workweek received training, tools, and prep to make sure the transition from 5 days to 4 went smoothly. The goals were to maintain productivity and revenue while increasing employee morale and improving work-life balance. But the actual results blew those goals out of the water. Not only did revenue not decrease, it actually rose by 8%. Employee retention rose, absenteeism dropped. 2/3 of workers reported lower levels of burnout. Ratings for mental and physical health improved as workers could get more sleep and had more time to exercise. And they were less bored at work since there was less pointless downtime and busy work. Across the board, in every aspect of work, ratings improved for both the employees and the companies. These pilot programs were so successful that 97% of involved workers responded in favor of continuing the 4-day workweek. Presumably, those last 3% just really like water cooler small talk about the weather or something. Very few things in life return results as clearly positive as these 4-day workweek trials. This is clearly the way forward, and it's essentially unanimous among workers, with some of them even reporting that no amount of money could convince them to return to a 5-day workweek. And all this is just considering the immediate effects on companies and their workers. The subsequent social and environmental effects would also be significant. Take commuting, for example. If a 4-day workweek were implemented at the federal level, that's a 20% reduction in commuting overnight. Roughly 130 million Americans drive to work every day. Think of the reduction in emissions from car exhaust from this one change alone. That is a staggering improvement, and one with essentially zero drawbacks, except presumably more intense propaganda from the fossil fuel industry as their profits shrink. Then as far as societal changes go, just think about what you would do with an extra weekend day every week. Think how many more meaningful things we could do with family and friends, or heck, just by ourselves. Simply getting to decompress and take an extra day for ourselves would dramatically improve the mental health of the entire workforce. You'd end up with a country of happier, healthier, less stressed, more rested workers. This, by every possible measure, is a no-brainer. So, what's the catch? This sounds a little too good to be true. Well, for one thing, we have to consider where exactly this push is coming from. This guy, Andrew Barnes, is the one more or less responsible for popularizing the notion of the 4-day workweek. He's a CEO himself, a position antagonistic to labor. Even if he has the best of intentions, the inherent contradictions between capital and labor makes his advocacy for a 4-day workweek tenuous at best. Regardless of how nice a guy he seems, look at how he talks about the initiative.
Now, people were changing their behaviors. They were recognizing that the day off was a gift, and it had to be earned. It wasn't something that you could just take for granted.
Barnes sees the 4-day week as a gift to his workers, not as a right based simply on the fact that productivity has increased so dramatically in the last 100 years. That perspective is obviously flawed, and should serve as a useful reminder and a warning that the capitalist class is always willing to rescind these privileges in order to increase their profits. Indeed, if you listen to most of the executives who praise the initiative, it's less about the fact that a 4-day workweek is just common sense and more humane, and more about the fact that it yields more efficient and compliant cogs in their machine. This is not to say that these executives are necessarily bad people, just that the goals of capital and labor are in direct conflict. The goal of capital is to increase profits and decrease costs, and the goal of labor is to get as much money as possible for their time and labor power. These two things will never be in alignment. But in the case of the 4-day workweek, it's about as close as it gets. The trials we've seen so far have followed the 100-80-100 model, a proposition that guarantees 100% of the worker's normal pay in 80% of the time, with a commitment to deliver 100% of their work in that time. Workers get time off and keep their pay. Businesses reduce costs in the form of electricity, turnover, and inefficiency. There are benefits to both parties. And that is the only reason we might see this actually come to pass. But here's the thing. While we absolutely should push for the federal implementation of a 4-day work week, we also have to be cognizant of the fact that until that time, this initiative is entirely dependent on the willingness of the capitalist class. We only won the 5-day work week thanks to a tremendously powerful militant labor movement. Same with all the other things we take for granted today. Child labor laws, workplace safety laws, social security, vacation time, and so much more. As we've explored in past videos, we are at the beginning of a new labor movement, but it's nowhere near as strong as it was 100 years ago. I'm not saying that to discourage anyone, but rather to remind you that without the strength of militant labor behind the movement for a 4-day work week, the capitalist class will not feel any pressure to actually go through with it, especially in industries where reducing working hours would cut into profits. So yes, while it is obvious that it's high time to bring our conception of work into the 21st century, we also need to continue building the labor movement so that we can demand these changes, not depend on the unreliable and self-serving generosity of the capitalist class. There was a time when workers had real say in their working conditions, and we can have that again. If you'd like to be a part of that, look into unionizing your workplace or joining a socialist organization. I've left links to the IWW and some of the bigger orgs in the description. Every one of us has a role to play. It's only together that we can force the change we want to see. Why not start with a 4-day work week? I mentioned at the beginning of this video that my channel is only possible thanks to my patrons on Patreon. As some of you may remember, I used to make general interest science videos. I didn't particularly enjoy it, but it was easy to get sponsors for that kind of content. When I made the switch to political content, something I actually do enjoy, most of my sponsors bailed. It's understandable, not many brands want to associate with anti-capitalist content, but that means I've had to rely more heavily on the generosity of viewers like you. I've got one reliable sponsor left, and it's a little nerve-wracking not to have much predictable income to count on. If you're able to chip in even $1 a month, I would greatly appreciate your support. As a little show of that appreciation, every patron, regardless of donation amount, gets early access to every video, plus access to our patrons-only Discord server. It's a great place to hang out. We've got everything from a recommended reading list, to a book club, to countless other channels to chat, learn, and explore your interests. We've built a great little community, and we'd love for you to be part of it. So if you'd like to help keep this channel afloat and get some great perks while you're at it, consider becoming a patron by visiting patreon.com/secondthought. If you enjoyed this video, consider dropping a like. If you hated it, a thumbs down. You can check out my other content by following the links on your screen. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.